For this year's presidential election, large turnouts are expected throughout the country. The bigger challenge is making sure all those votes are counted, especially if they're cast by mail. In the September primary, the turnout in Massachusetts was above normal, but there were still problems with balloting and voter confusion. Here in Boston, officials are applying the lessons from the primary while expecting an even larger turnout in the weeks ahead. To share some guidance is Boston's Election Commissioner Eneida Tavares. Thank you very much for joining us again, Commissioner.
Thank you for having me, Chris. And as you mentioned, there were a lot of lessons learned from September, and we are taking those lessons and moving forward for the November election. Voters should know this time around that they will have a variety of options for returning their vote by mail ballots. And for the November election, vote by mail ballots can be requested online. So rather than mailing in an application, you can simply go into the Secretary of State's website and request your ballot, and your request will come directly to us. When it comes to returning your ballot, we have expanded the number of drop boxes that we're going to have across the city. For the September primary, we had 2 drop boxes here at City Hall, and voters were able to return their ballots to an early voting location. For November, we're going to have 17 drop boxes, 2 here at City Hall, 15 across the city, mainly at Boston Public Libraries, and 1 at a BCYF location because the library in Rosendale is currently under construction.
I want to have you explain a bit about why those drop-off boxes could be so helpful, because my wife and I voted by mail. And I think we did a pretty quick turnaround after we got our ballots. I went to the post office and I was still surprised at how long it took them to get where they were supposed to go. So I guess drop boxes can really help avoid the problem of ballots arriving late.
There are a lot of concerns about ballots arriving to us on time, which is why we decided to go with the drop boxes. However, you took the proper steps. You returned your ballot as soon as possible, and it can still take some time. So we're asking voters, if they are going to mail their ballot, to allow at least 7 days if you're going to put it in the mail, and don't hold on to your ballot. Return it as soon as possible. So we will have the drop boxes available. Drop boxes will be available starting during the early voting period, which begins Saturday, October 17th, and they'll be up until November 3rd at 8 p.m. So they really will have up until the last minute to return their ballot to a drop box, and we'll have someone who will be responsible for checking those drop boxes daily and retrieving those ballots and returning them to City Hall.
One other problem we had, and this is throughout the state at least, a number of ballots were rejected, not because of fraud, but maybe more likely because of confusion or because people just weren't used to doing all the things they had to do, like signing the ballot in a certain place. What can be done about that?
So I encourage voters to take their time and read the instructions that will be included with their ballot. There is a set of instructions that is translated into multiple languages. There has to be a signature on that envelope. At the very least, it needs a signature. So make sure that you are signing the envelope that is included with the ballot. Make sure that you're returning your ballot on time. Again, for the September primary, ballots had to arrive by September 1st. For November 3rd, it has to be postmarked by November 3rd and arrive here no later than the 6th. So at the very least, make sure that it's postmarked by November 3rd.
Trying to put this in perspective, if you look at what happened in the primary, there was a study showing that mail-in voting seemed to get a better response from wealthier communities where more people had higher levels of education. But at the same time, the turnout in the city of Boston was pretty impressive. So how do you weigh those two against each other?
It was the first time we had early voting. We did have about 115,000 requests, 112,000 requests, and of that total, only 55,000 of those ballots were returned. So a lot of people who actually requested a ballot by mail decided to show up in person either during the early voting period or on election day. So I think it's going to take some time before voters get fully comfortable with the vote by mail system, but I would say it did work well. But voters should know, if for some reason they don't get their ballot, there's a tracking system. They should stay on top of the tracking system. If they don't see a movement on the tracking system, they can make an alternate arrangement for voting. Early voting will start, as I mentioned previously, on October 17th through October 30th. And if they don't take advantage of the early voting period, they can still vote on election day in person.
What about the capacity for in-person early voting? I'm sure you were prepared for more people coming and trying to take advantage of that.
That's correct. We are preparing for more people taking advantage of that, but the difference this time around is that we have 2 weeks of early voting, which include 2 full weekends, Saturday, October 17th, Saturday, October 24th, and the 25th, which was never an option before. We will have 10 sites going on Saturdays and Sundays. We'll have sites in the community on Tuesdays and Thursdays. City Hall will be our main early voting location every weekday during the early voting period.
One other concern is that the state's moratorium on evictions will expire on October 17th, which is the first day of early voting in Boston. I don't think everybody's going to be evicted all at once, but I mean, some people are going to be displaced. If they are displaced from where they've been living and where they were registered to vote, what does that mean for this election?
Well, legally, we cannot touch someone's voter registration. So unless someone lets us know that they are no longer living somewhere, they will remain a registered voter at their last address.
What about the deadlines, baby? Because every year we do this because it's always so important. First of all, for being registered to vote, when does that have to be done?
That has to be done by October 24th. So voters have, residents have until October 24th to register to vote. It's now a 10-day deadline. Before it was 20 days before an election. It's now 10 days. So you can still take advantage of early voting and register to vote up until the 24th.
By the way, you know, when I was growing up, registration was something that had to be done in person. What is it like now?
You can register to vote online. However, you do need to have a driver's license on file. So that's something that people should be aware of. If you don't have a driver's license, you will still have to send in a paper registration. So you can register online, you can register in person in our office here, or you can simply download the application from our website.
We should also mention that the state has already begun sending out mail-in ballots to voters, but what are the deadlines around that people should keep in mind?
The deadline for requesting a ballot is October 28th. So anyone who's interested in voting by mail should be aware of that deadline. And again, with that process, you can request your ballot online using the Secretary of State's website. It will first prompt you to verify your voter registration. And once it verifies that you're a registered voter, it will allow you to request a ballot, which will come directly to us. That eliminates the mail-in piece and any concern about the application actually getting to us.
Of course, what you're still going to be handling on the so-called election day in November are in-person voters at polling places. You might need more people. So are you ready? Do you need volunteers to make that work?
We have seen a record number of volunteers, and we are staffing up our precincts. Right now, we have about 1,960 poll workers staffed for election day, which is more than we usually staff. And we're trying to prepare just in case any of our election officers get sick, that we still have plenty of hands on deck to manage the in-person voting.
I know poll workers are part of the process, and usually they're doing something constructive. This year, we're worried there might be an influx of some other kinds of poll watchers. Are you worried about that at all?
We will be training all of our election officers in how to handle that. We generally train them, but we should definitely be, it's something that we will be prepared for. Poll watchers are allowed to observe the election proceedings, but it may be a situation where they may have to rotate and take turns because we do have capacity limits in the space, so everyone can't be inside of a polling location all at one time.
And briefly, I know we touched on this before the primary as well, but for people especially who did not vote in the primary in person at least, there have been some polling place changes. So if people want to find out about those or anything else that's coming up, what's the best way to do that?
They can go to boston.gov/elections. We have been up to date on all of our information there. We are putting this information out on social media, via press releases, and every single registered voter that was affected by the polling location changes in September will receive another notification in the mail ahead of the November election, just as a reminder that their polling location did change.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to share that with us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
That was Eneida Tavares, Boston Election Commissioner. We'll have more news in just a moment.